Hi, conversationers, and welcome back to the blog. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, Lainey Louie, who will be sharing her story as an Asian Canadian woman today. Before we dive in, Lainey, we wanted to give you a little background on who we are. So the Asian Conversation was born in a breakout room at Queen's University. This past semester, we all took a digital marketing class, and one of our deliverables was to create a blog. And after reflecting on our backgrounds and our upbringing, we ended up really bonding over our experiences as Asian Canadian women, and we decided to make this our blog idea. So today, the goal of our blog is twofold. One, to empower readers who can relate, and two, to educate those who don't. We address a lot of topics like job hunting as a minority and the pandemic from an Asian perspective, and also some more lighthearted conversations like our favorite snacks and our favorite Asian brands. And we really believe that change starts with something as simple as a conversation, and we're just so glad to have you join the convo today.
I'm excited. I hope we get to talk about snacks and other lighthearted things.
Yeah, so to get us started, why don't you share a brief introduction about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Lainey Louie. Speaking of blogs, I am the founder of the blog, LaineyGossip.com. I can't believe I've been doing this for 17 years now, but essentially I gossip about celebrities on the internet. I'm also an entertainment reporter for eTalk on CTV and a talk show host on The Social, also on CTV. And I am Asian and proudly so. And I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And as you mentioned, you have a blog called Lainey Gossip. Could you talk a bit about how that all started for those that don't know, and what your favorite part about it is?
I started Lainey Gossip as a newsletter when I was in between jobs, and I sent emails to a couple of friends who I worked with at my previous job about celebrities, and they were just my thoughts and rambles, but they thought that the emails were entertaining, so they started sending it to their friends who sent it to their friends, and pretty soon there was a lot of people reading this email that I was just sending, and so I ended up having a distribution list of 3,000 people or something. And so it was crashing the mail server. So back then, when maybe you guys weren't even born yet, or you were definitely babies, back then, blogging was not a thing. It was very, very new. And a friend of mine who worked in web design was like, I'm just going to build you a blog. That's way easier. And people can go online and read this. So he built me a blog, and then it started reaching more and more people, and it kind of took off. And what I like about it is, I like to write. So, I don't think anyone likes to write, but I do enjoy gossiping, and I do enjoy writing down thoughts about celebrity gossip. I also, enjoy, at this point, Lainey Gossip features lots of different writers, and I enjoy the process of engaging with other contributors and featuring voices and amplifying their stories and amplifying their views. So I get a lot of out of that, and one of my theses is that gossip is a form of communication. It is perhaps one of our most primitive forms of communication. It's the way human beings relate to each other. There's already a lot of scientific, academic, since you guys are at Queen's, academic research that supports this. So I feel like I hope I can one day stop defending it, but I still have to. A part of my job is defending the value of gossip, and so I enjoy doing that too.
Awesome, thank you. And this interview would never actually have happened if it weren't for Eliminate Hate. So would you share with us what Eliminate Hate is all about and what inspired you to be a part of it?
Eliminate Hate is an organization that aims to, through arts and culture, empower and educate, but also to hopefully eradicate racism against Asian Canadians. And it's particularly relevant now, since over the last couple of years, we've seen a rise in Asian hate crimes and anti-Asian racism. And so we believe at Eliminate Hate that through the power of storytelling, through the power of shared experience, we can begin to remove stereotypes, push back against stereotypes against Asians, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, and also have a voice in the culture. For a long time, Asian voices were minimized in the culture. So I joined the organization because it certainly had an impact on me as an Asian person, worrying about not just my safety, but the safety of my family members. And I also have somewhat of a platform, and there aren't that many Asians in the Canadian media landscape. So I see that as my responsibility, which is why I wanted to join. And I also really believe in the specific angle of the organization, which is using arts and culture. And that's not to say one way is better than the other, but Eliminate Hate does focus on arts and culture specifically as a way to address these stereotypes and prejudice. And I think that there is so much power in arts and culture. I mean, it's the way we relate to each other. It's the way we share stories. It's the way we bond. So that is what the value of Eliminate Hate is.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think we can agree, like we started our blog because we saw, there's a lack of an Asian community, especially at Queens. And so I think like coming together and starting these conversations are so important. One last question from me, but besides being an ambassador for Eliminate Hate, like how do you feel that you maintain your Asian identity?
I don't know that it's a conscious thing in terms of maintaining my Asian identity. I think I am, and it's, I was born to Asian parents. I was raised in Chinese culture, so it's not, identity is something that we can't separate ourselves from. It is it's an interesting thing to explore, where all of us trying to reconcile our various identities, I guess, especially as people who are living in the West from a different culture. So I certainly have felt in the past that I had to work on bridging the two cultures that shaped me. But right now, I don't see it as a conscious effort to maintain my Asian identity. And I think hopefully that is the next step of encouraging an evolution, is that we don't have to try. I mean, we just are, and people can either accept it or they can sit down.
For sure. Awesome. Thank you so much.
No, exactly. I definitely agree with you, Lainey. Sometimes it is hard to bridge that gap. And I think that, Eliminate Hate does a great job of that with initiatives like, Reclaim Your Name. I wrote a post about that on our blog, sort of about how, oftentimes we westernize our names. Like, I mentioned that, he, as in the pronoun he, when I'm checking out a sort of like a news store. But I think, what Eliminate Hate is doing is really, really great. And I'll be taking over the next few questions here. So as I mentioned, I think, Eliminate Hate is a really great resource for those who are looking to learn more about anti-Asian racism. I was just wondering if you had any advice for how people can educate themselves on the Asian Canadian experience, or in other words, what advice do you have for non-Asian Canadians looking to take that first step?
The first piece of advice is to take the initiative yourself. I think that we are beyond the point where people of color, people from different marginalized communities have to assume any responsibility for educating people who are part of the status quo. Mm-hmm. So taking the initiative and is a big step and is appreciated.
Yeah.
That said, I'm not going to give you cookies for it, but thank you. It's great. Take the initiative. And I think that effort goes a long way. In terms of advice, I don't really have any advice, because I think that for me personally, I'm not an expert in how to educate people and what the right way to educate people is. Everybody has their own style of learning. Everybody has their own, the things that they respond to best. What I will say, though, is that what we're trying to address, not just through Eliminate Hate, but all organizations that are pushing back and fighting racism in all forms and being actively anti-racist, period, is that much of our foundational education is skewed, and it is colonial, and it was written or formed through a white lens. And so we do have to challenge older forms of information. That's not to say that we need to be like super Trumpy and like have alternative facts for things. I'm not saying that to discredit like all of medical science. But if we were to use medicine as an example, a lot of research in much of healthcare, as you probably know, is based on studies of white men, which is why, you know, for example, in heart and stroke research, they're just realizing that women respond to heart and stroke differently. And so much of the research was based on a white male's response to this illness. And so the same can be said for history and the parts of history that were told to us as to be important. We see this in how, you know, Indigenous history was fed to us. I mean, I'm a lot older than you, I'm sure, and back in my day, Indigenous history was certainly not taught the way it really was if you ask somebody who is from an Indigenous background. And I think it's getting better now, but it's about that lens. So, you know, when you're getting that information, make sure or challenge where it's coming from and what that perspective is. And to relate it back to Asian Canadian history and in this country, even I, as someone from an Asian background, I'm starting to learn about the history of our people, my people, Chinese people in this country. It's only within the last year that I learned about, you know, Chinese produce distributors and farmers in Western Canada, and how they, like 100 years ago, were making a lot of money and very successful, and really had the farming and produce market dominated. And when white people found that out, they introduced laws and legislation to curb the influence of the Chinese and other Asian farmers and produce distributors. And it has led to a whole bunch of things. I mean, this is a very quick summary of it, but it has led to a disparaging of Asian food, a devaluing of Asian food, Asian grocery stores. And so if I'm still learning about the history of my people and, you know, Chinese people and where they came from, then I'm sure that for those people who don't have that same background and who really are like from a Western culture, I'm sure that their perspectives are skewed too. So just to make sure that that perspective is widened and to understand where all of this is coming from and the root of it.
Wow, what a great answer. I definitely agree with that. I'm, you know, obviously still learning about my Chinese background as well, you know, learning from my mom, learning at school, and, you know, in the age of information, it's really overwhelming sometimes to know where to start. But I definitely agree that it's really important to have that critical lens when you're faced with an abundance of information, and to really, you know, think twice and just always stay curious about things. So appreciate that answer. My next question, you know, you mentioned that you will not necessarily like to write, but you do write. And, you know, besides being an ambassador, you're so many other things, but you're also an author of a book called Listen to the Squawking Chicken, When Mother Knows Best, What's a Daughter to Do, a memoir, sort of. I recently picked up a copy and I actually ended up reading it in one sitting. One story
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I thoroughly enjoyed it. It didn't even feel like reading to me, to be honest. I related to a lot of it. So I really, really enjoyed it, and I appreciate sort of you sharing your experience with that. But, you know, with all the stories, one that really stood out to me was one about fitting in, and how you dyed your hair a lighter shade and you wore contacts to sort of, you know, look more like everyone around you. You've clearly come a really long way from then. So our next question is, how did you learn to embrace your identity?
I mean, thanks for mentioning my book. And the book is dedicated to my ma, the squawking chicken. And it's a love letter to her, really. And, she probably is the single most important person in my life with how she shaped me and laid a foundation for my growth that may not have taken effect at the time that she gave me those lessons, but eventually those lessons grew out of me in productive ways. And so the first part of my answer about that is, when I wanted to change myself, or when I wanted to westernize myself, my mom was very resistant to that. And she was really the first person to be like, you are you, and it's great. Well, I mean, it's great with asterisks because, Chinese mother. Yeah. But, why would you want to be a white person? Why wouldn't you want my genes? I'm awesome.
Yeah.
And so that was like building that self-belief and confidence came from my mom initially. But of course, again, as I said, those lessons sometimes take a while to take root. And so, of course, through my teens, I grew up where I was almost always the only Asian or one of two Asians in the classroom. So it's hard not to want to fit in. It's only natural through adolescence. And so there was that struggle for a long time. And I think that when it really started turning around for me was probably into my 20s, when I started appreciating that not the same is good. And it's not a moment, it's a process where you see that your differences make you. And that's such a Pollyanna answer. But the reason why sometimes cliche answers are so cliche is because they're true. It takes a while, but when you can figure out that your differences in combination make the thing that is uniquely you, then you start to not give a shit anymore about wanting to be the same.
Right.
And that applies to, a full embrace of my Asian culture.
Right. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. There's all these, Tumblr quotes that, we probably all grew up with, like, don't be someone else, everyone's taken, like, be yourself. And, some at first, they are very cliche, but I feel like the older we grow and the more that we experience, it is true that, there's only one way to sort of be genuine, and that is really just to be yourself. So yeah, you mentioned that, not the same is good. And that ties into a quote that really stuck with me, even, weeks after finishing your book, is walk like an elephant, squawk like a chicken. The reason for this is because I feel like in many Asian cultures, women are often told, not to draw too much attention to yourself, and just to sort of hang out in the background. You have definitely done quite the opposite. So our question is, what besides your mom and your upbringing has really helped you to be unapologetically yourself? What are some good and bad things that have sort of come from making your presence really known?
I don't know. I was raised by a woman who was just so loud and is still so loud and abrasive and very not meek. And to your point, there is a tradition of that in all cultures, I think, but in particularly still in Asian cultures. So my example, my model of how to be a woman was someone who is that way. So I think that that was why it was never a question for me to be opinionated and to be myself, because in my own home, that was my example. I didn't have the other example. Right. So the norm for me was the anti-norm. So that was a big part of it. And then in terms of what's good and bad about being outspoken, Well, what's great is that like um, I I get to speak for myself.
Mhm.
So whether I succeed or fail, if I'm using my voice, at least it's on my own terms.
Mhm.
And that's really, I wouldn't say comforting, but they say that the hardest thing to live with is regret, or one of the hardest things. And so when I can use my own voice, it means that it it won't ever come to a point where I regret not saying or regret not doing the thing I really wanted to do. Uh, and so that's a bonus. That's a good part. The bad part is that um, in being super opinionated and outspoken, I have gotten myself into trouble, and it has been my fault.
Right.
Um, and in particular in my career, I've been blogging for 17 years. So in the early part of uh, Lainey Gossip through the 2000s, there was content that I put out there that was reflective of the time, certainly, but that's not an excuse for ignorance and um, racism and transphobia and all kinds of negative and shitty things that I have to own. Can't blame anybody else, right? I have to eat that.
Right.
And so when you put yourself out there, you have to eat your own shit. Um, is that bad? It doesn't feel good,
Mhm.
but that is, if I mean, but I wouldn't say that's a downside because you learn from it, hopefully. But that is a risk that you take. And I have taken that risk, and I have assumed the responsibility and paid for that risk,
Mhm.
and will probably continue to have to atone for it, as I should.
Mhm. Right. Yeah, no, I definitely agree that, in today's sort of culture, you make one wrong move and sort of everyone is on you basically. But I think that the most important thing is to really just take responsibility and to always be open to learning and admitting that, sometimes you've made a mistake and sometimes you're wrong because, we're not perfect by any means. There's a lot of different experiences that, shape who we are. And we don't want to all be robots and exist in the metaverse. Like we want to be real humans with real emotions. So I really appreciate your honesty in that regard. You sort of, talked a lot about this, and I definitely relate to it. I have a very close relationship with my mom as well, and I can see that you're very close with your mom, and she's really shaped who you are. But I think we can really all relate to your sort of unorthodox upbringing that's not really traditionally Asian or really conventionally Western. So would you say that you are a better person today because of that upbringing?
I don't know if I can say I'm a better person. I'm not sure if I can say that about myself. Um, so it's not the adjective I would use. I would say that I am as close to the person that I was meant to be because of my upbringing, and specifically that unique upbringing of my parents and their unorthodox parenting and their decisions that had an impact on my life. For example, leaving Hong Kong and coming here. Um, I would be a different person if I was raised in Hong Kong, if I grew up in their homeland.
Yeah.
I am the person I am now because they made a decision to leave Hong Kong and come to Canada.
Right.
So I definitely think that, um, for sure, all the decisions that my parents made had a huge effect on who I became and who I was meant to be.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, there is that gap definitely when you're growing up as like a first generation, second generation immigrant to Canada. My parents are both Chinese, and I fully grew up in Vancouver, BC. And there's definitely a lot of different parenting. I'm like, well, I wasn't allowed to have sleepovers until I was like 13, because, that's not something that
Same.
necessarily, yeah. And I was really upset at my parents for it. And like you said, in the moment, you don't really appreciate those lessons. But I think that, maybe I should have been allowed to have sleepovers, but there are other lessons that are a little more serious that you grow to appreciate, and you think that without them you would be a completely different person. So Yeah, that's all the questions that I had. I think we have time for a few more. Jana, if you want to fire away.
So I think one thing that we talked a lot about in our blog was the whole concept of intersectionality. So my question kind of ties with that. Have you experienced challenges in your personal and or professional life due to your intersectionality? And if so, how did you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, I think that I have experienced, especially in my profession, I mean, in any profession, being a woman, we still don't have like pay equality there. One quick answer. And then in my profession, as I mentioned earlier, there aren't very many, I mean, there's more now for sure, but there aren't very many Asian women. And so the challenge with respect to that is whether or not it's overt, you are made to feel that you're the only one, that there's only room for you, that there should be only one Asian voice. And so it's amazing to me, and I wish it still wasn't amazing, but that's what history is, that I'm on a television show on like a major network in Canada, and I sit next to another Asian woman. Melissa Grello is Filipino. And I don't think I didn't see that growing up. Like, there was Connie Chung. I don't know if you know who that is, but because that's like, from a generation before. But, we had Connie Chung, but like Connie Chung wasn't sitting next to another Connie Chung or whoever. And so there is still the feeling of only space for one person. And overcoming that challenge, I'm not going to say that just because Melissa and I sit next to each other, the challenge is overcome. How do you overcome that challenge? Those decisions, unfortunately, are still not up to me, because Asian women in general, and then Asian people and Asian women are not often in positions of power in any industry, certainly not in arts and entertainment and broadcasting. So I think that it's a start for me to be there, but it is definitely a challenge and a frustration that I'm not seeing more Asian female producers. I'm not seeing more Asian female directors. I'm not seeing more Asian female television executives. It's very frustrating. And I can talk about it. I can push for it. I can write about it, but that's what I can do in solidarity with my peers. But we're gonna have to get more people in power in order to change it, because ultimately we're not the decision makers. That's frustrating. So that's one part of the answer in terms of intersectionality, that double whammy in broadcasting, in arts and entertainment, right? And you can see it in film, on scripted television shows, like, beyond the white dude, who every story is about the white dude, then it's the white woman. And then very rarely do you have a show or a movie about an Asian woman. So it was really exciting to me that like Gemma Chan was essentially the lead in Marvel's The Eternals. That was great. But how many more times are we going to see that? Is it going to be another, 40 years? So that is a tremendous source of frustration in the field that I specialize in, so to speak. I hope that answers your question.
It definitely answered my question. And I think something that's common with a lot of Asian youth, I feel, is that kind of sense of frustration and complacency when you're growing up and you don't see that representation. I know I at least used to feel I accepted, I guess, the fact that I wouldn't see it in the future, and it just wasn't something that was there. But I think growing up and seeing more examples of that representation in different industries like yourself is very inspiring, and it kind of helps motivate us and push us forward to, you have to find those leaders and you have to even become those leaders that create that difference.
Yeah,
Um,
I think, and I do think that some progress is being made, like in my industry. You know, when we're talking about decision makers, Mindy Kaling is a decision maker. And in making that decision, she has given us a show called Never Have I Ever, which stars a South Asian teenager, happens to be Canadian, Maitreyi Ramakrishnan, who is the lead of a teen comedy. Like, mind blown for when I was growing up, right? Could never happen. And that's amazing and definitely progress. That said, there's only one Never Have I Ever, where there's literally like 18 Beverly Hills 90210 and Dawson's Creek and whatever. So that's where we have to go, right? We can't just, there's not enough to have one Mindy Kaling. And Mindy Kaling is an outlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I couldn't agree more. And actually, kind of bouncing off of what you just said, with Never Have I Ever and having a lead that's at such a young age, if you would have any advice, if you could go back in time, what would you say for someone who's 20 years old?
I like someone who's 20 years old right now, or going back to tell myself when I was 20 years old?
Going back to tell yourself when you were 20 years old.
Okay, got it. Look, I would like to go back and tell myself not to write the things that you wrote and, you know, be better. And yet, like, and of course, I would do that. I would be like, open your eyes, you know, even as a person of color, even as a woman, you have prejudices, you have biases. And you need to learn from those. Like, here's what they are. But I just, at the same time, like, I don't know that I would have listened. You know, at 20, I was just operating on instinct. And so if I could go back, I don't think the 20-year-old me would listen to the me of now.
Yeah.
So I guess the way that I'm going to answer your question is at 20, I think that, like, and what scares me, to your point, one of the points that was brought up earlier, at 20, I think that you're going to make mistakes. Like, you're going to, I mean, and again, if we knew better, we would do better. But at 20, that is the time for you to fuck up. And you're going to. And I think that at 20, right now, it is scary out there because, like, you screw up and no one's forgiven, or you're hauled out and, like, in the town square. So I guess what I would say is, knowing that you're going to make mistakes and you don't know what they are, maybe the thing to do for a kinder, gentler world is to have some understanding for the people who are around you who also fuck up. And I wonder if that your generation can save us after mine screwed it up for everybody.
I actually really like that advice, just because I think something that's common with everyone, and especially I feel like when you're 20 years old, you think everything you do is so important when you can't really see the big picture, thinking that it's okay for you to miss. So my next question is kind of more general, just about your career. So what goals do you have for yourself, your career, and your ambassadorship in 2022?
Whew. That's a big one. I'm trying to figure that out. So that's my answer to that. I think, like a lot of people, and certainly for you, given that part of your university experience has been a non-real university experience over the last couple of years, it must really be so shitty. And I don't mean to, like, double down on that either. I'm sorry. But I think, you know, any plans that I had 3 years ago were completely derailed. And So in terms of me, like I am a goal setter. I have had and have ambitions, and I had things I wanted to do. And then I got lost in going into 3 years of nothing is predictable. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to answer once again one of your questions in a different way of what am I doing? Like, where am I going? And I spent a lot of time and I still am being really angry at these, what I thought were these golden years, this golden time of creativity for me. Like, I'm at an age where, like, my career, I have opportunity and maturity and experience, and then it was just kind of like boom, stop. And so I've spent a lot of time having to deal with that anger, and I'm still processing it. And I don't think that I can properly articulate new goals and come up with them until I get past that resentment and anger. So in a moment of vulnerability and honesty with you right now, what I'm sharing is that I don't know that I have any I have any clear goals, because I'm too busy trying to get to the right like headspace to be able to set a good goal, realistic goal, a goal that I want. I do know that eventually I want to write another book, that it's going to be fiction. I had ideas and I still, tinker with those ideas, but I can't get them off the ground because I'm not in the right creative space. So I hope maybe that resonates with some people. And I've, as airy fairy as this sounds, I've been trying to give myself permission to not have this go goal until I'm ready to have it.
I actually really like that answer, just because I think with COVID, there's been so much uncertainty, and I think everyone are really different. I think it's really important for people to know that it's okay to not be sure of where you're going, or what you might be wanting to do, what your goals might be, just because we've been thrown into this completely unprecedented situation. And so it's okay to take that time to just step back and figure out where you want to go, figure out what you're doing, and get over that resentment, as you said, before you make those choices. So I really do like that answer. So I guess just to kind of like my last question here would just be, for anybody who wants to connect with you, stay up to date with your work, etc., keep following you, what would be the best way for them to keep up to date with you? Would it be through your social media, or would it be reading your books, etc.?
My book is always good. It's mostly LaineyGossip.com. That is where I spend the most time every day. I produce personally probably between 2,500 and 3,000 words a day on Lainey Gossip. And it's not just like, I'm not just saying these two people are dating and blah, blah, blah. There is analysis of celebrity culture on there for sure, but it also, we do at Lainey Gossip relate celebrity culture to real world implications and real life discussions. And an example of that is, today I wrote an article on Matt Damon, who is the spokesperson for crypto.com. And that article isn't about just, oh, Matt Damon, he's a movie star. It's about celebrities lending their platforms to controversial markets like crypto, and what effect that can have on the greater public. So my truest thoughts are at LaineyGossip.com. To answer your question, where can people keep up to date with me? So it's light. Sometimes I'm actually sharing my thoughts on the low-rise pants trend that's coming back. But sometimes I'm sharing my thoughts on whether or not crypto is a Ponzi scheme. And at other times I'm sharing my thoughts on relationships and, how relationships are affected by everything from fame to social media to the pressure to keep up appearances. Yesterday I wrote about Angelina Jolie and her advocacy for the Violence Against Women Act in the US. And, her speech addressed inequities in domestic violence reporting for people of color. And I wrote about that research and how I was researching it because she talked about it. So anyway, my point is that other than I do post on Instagram or whatever, but to keep up with me and the things I'm curious about, the things I'm frustrated about, the things I'm happy about, the things I'm excited about, it's my website, laineygossip.com.
Right. That's very cool. I was just gonna comment and jump in here that I've been reading a book called Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. And after reading that book and watching your TED Talk, it really hit home that we as humans are very social creatures. And right now in this people follow people sort of revolution, I really do, think that what you're doing is really great, and it will only become more prominent in the future. And like you said, you sometimes might feel the need to sort of defend your career and sort of what you're doing, but just know that you definitely have 3 supporters on this call right now, and we really value sort of what you're doing in the creative space and in your ambassadorship. So just being mindful of time. I know that you said you only have around 45 minutes. So just wanted to wrap up and say, thank you so much for hopping on with us today. We really appreciate, your honesty and your vulnerability. And speaking for all of us, we definitely learned so much from you today. So yeah, thank you so much, Lainey.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I can tell you that I think it is in many ways a terrifying time, but also a really exciting time. Because in these settings, I see myself as in Cantonese, we say "姐姐," and I think in Korean it's "uni." And I wish I knew it in a different dialect, like in Mandarin or in Japanese, but I hope that translates well enough. So as your "姐姐" or "uni," it's I never had that in media or in like academia, and so it's really rewarding for me. But it's not just about me. It's I want to learn from you too. As I said, I think your generation will save us. And so I think that this kind of exchange is something really powerful. And as Asians, we weren't necessarily among ourselves encouraged to be emotive and sharing and talking about our feelings. And I know that that's a generalization, but it is, culturally, part of what our background is. So it's good that we're developing this community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, 100% agree. Hannah, Jana, do you guys have anything else to add here?
I just want to thank you so much for, taking the time to talk to us. This is an amazing opportunity for us, and we learned a lot. So thank you.
Let's do this in person at some point.
Oh yes, of course, we would love to.
Okay.
And just like Elizabeth and Hannah said, I think I'll say the same thing. One thing that's common between us 3 is that we all love your content, and it's something that's really resonated with us. So having the opportunity to talk to you and ask you questions was really, really great. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lainey. We hope you have a great day, and we'll catch you in person next time.
Great. Bye.
Okay, bye.